we'll be talking about how we took an idea that we had to make this organization, Bridge4Good, and how we made that a real thing. But before we get started on that, we wanted to just introduce ourselves quickly. So I'm Karina. I'm one of the co-founders of Bridge4Good. I'm also a member of the Harvard class of 2026.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. I'm Victoria. I'm also a co-founder of Bridge4Good and also part of the Harvard class of 2026.
And I'm Neha. I'm a co-founder of Bridge4Good and Lambert High School class of 2025, and I'm so excited to be here today.
So we're going to do a little bit of an interactive activity to kind of get our brains warm. So we have 2 prompts for this word cloud. So you can go ahead and grab your phones or use your laptops. Join us at menti.com and then use this code that's on the screen, 65698100. You can just type that in. And then we can move on to some of these questions. And so the first question that should show up is what comes to mind when you think of AI? So you can kind of put any words that come to mind there. And then the second question, how do you feel about starting a nonprofit? And so we can kind of go through these things together. So the code should stay up while I present. So here we go. Feel free to kind of enter the words as you can see them. We see things coming through: artificial intelligence, chatbot, NPC in a game. Interesting. Yeah, the future. It's great. We can keep them coming for a little longer. Yeah, I see ease and efficiency. Those are really key, kind of important things. When we think about technology, we think about things that make our lives easier and things that solve problems for others. And so we can continue to think about how we can bring kind of ease and efficiency to help other people. Awesome. These are all really amazing answers. I think now we can maybe move on to our second question, which is, let's see if it'll let me swap. How do you feel about starting a nonprofit? So what kind of comes to mind? Are you excited? Are you interested in what it might bring? Are you confused, like not really sure where to start? Those are some examples, but any reaction is like totally welcome. But yeah, risky, a lot of work for sure. Not sure where to start, but awesome. So we got a mix of different emotions here, which is great. We'll keep them coming for a little while longer. Yeah, risky but worthwhile. I think that's a great one. Confused and excited. Oh yeah, funding. Where do you get the money? We'll talk about that later for sure. Awesome. I think these were a lot of the they summarize a lot of the emotions that Neha and Victoria and I had when we first started our nonprofit, Bridge4Good. We were kind of not quite sure where to start. We didn't know how much risk we wanted to take. Uncertainty for sure. Like we didn't know what the future would hold. It was definitely hard, and we needed a lot of help from other people to kind of get going. And so that's another theme we'll come back to. Thank you all so much for your active participation. Really, really appreciate it. These were such great answers. Yeah, I think we'll kind of use that to segue into the rest of our conversation today. Here's just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. We'll kind of talk about what Bridge4Good is, kind of what our initial idea was, and then how it came to life in one of these Teens in AI hackathons, which I think you all will be participating in something similar over the next few weeks, which is very exciting. And then we'll talk about what happened after the hackathon. So how we took Bridge4Good from an idea to a real organization. We'll talk about what we're up to now. And then at the end, we'll leave a little bit of kind of open conversation about some of our other work in AI applications towards different social issues.
Hi everyone. So to get started, I'm first going to introduce what Bridge4Good is. So essentially, we participated in this hackathon during the global pandemic that we all experienced, and we were seeing this problem in the world, and we were really interested in trying our best to help address it. So essentially, during COVID, there was a lot of crippling of these support systems for homeless individuals across the US. And essentially, these homeless shelters and these food banks, including the ones that we knew of and like saw in our local communities, were running out of supplies. And at the same time, even though people really wanted to donate and wanted to help out, these people were like not willing to venture out because they were like concerned about transmission, and they just didn't know how to bring their kind of like donations to these locations and how to kind of like bridge this gap between people who were willing to donate and this really large and increasingly growing to be larger need. And as a result, we created our platform, which basically is something that enabled these willing donors that I mentioned to make a donation to these shelters and these food banks. And one really like key feature or like aspect that we were thinking about is we didn't want to have these donors leave the comfort of their homes and really sort of like reduce the friction that kind of like between deciding to make a donation and then seeing the actual sort of impact and the actual item that you were able to contribute to these like shelters or these food banks. So some of the key features here were we basically did this through Amazon, where people could see very transparently where every dollar that they spent was going because these purchases were made through this sort of Amazon-based platform. We also did sort of a machine learning based donor shelter matching like structure. I think like while we were doing this, I saw that a lot of you in the like what comes to mind when you think about AI prompt mentioned something like ChatGPT or like chatbots, which kind of are like encompassed by this like language modeling, generative artificial intelligence. Like maybe those are terms that are sort of related to this. And one thing that these kind of like new technologies, which are around now, but weren't around when we were thinking about the problem space and sort of like the technical skills or the skills in general or the time and energy that we had, we didn't have access to tools like these. And something that they're really great at is sort of like coding and like explaining like technical concepts. So then we think like this sort of like machine learning based tool is now maybe like more accessible as something that you could learn maybe a little bit more quickly or be able to implement with the help of these tools. And essentially, we also, going to our third and last key feature, we also wanted to support these personal campaigns for people to raise supplies for shelters and really think about getting sort of like local involvement and having people think about mobilizing the people around them. So then some of the implications of these features, like I mentioned, there is this like purchase transparency aspect, like you really knew where your money was going. And then because we kind of like had this algorithmic and also like kind of like personal campaign based approach, there's maybe less inherent bias in the donor versus the needs distribution. And then part of the personal campaigns is we also were really interested because we were like youths at that time and still that we wanted to get youth involved to combat homelessness in America.
So thanks, Victoria, for the intro and orientation to what Bridge4Good is. Now I'll be getting into sort of the thick of our talk, which is kind of how Bridge4Good originated and then how we ended up growing it. So we were a team of 5 girls, aged 13 to 16, when we started Bridge4Good. We met at the Teens and AI hackathon. So Victoria and I did know each other beforehand, but most of the team did not know each other at all beforehand. And so we met and proposed Bridge4Good during this Teens and AI Youth versus COVID hackathon in April 2020, which was an amazing event. During the hackathon, we were lucky enough to have amazing mentors and speaker sessions that really, really helped us kind of drill down on what idea did we have, what kind of problem do we want to solve, and how we could use technology like AI and machine learning solutions to actually address the problem. And so we, at the start, had a lot of help. So we had all the Teens and AI speakers and mentors at the hackathon. And then we also, after the hackathon, earned mentorship from Microsoft Avanade. They were one of the sponsors of that Teens and AI hackathon. And because they liked our idea, they continued on with us afterwards. And so they were really, really instrumental in getting some of the technology up and running, having our website kind of out as fast as possible. So we really owe a lot, I think, to all of the mentors and the help that we received from Teens in AI for sure for starting this thing. The first kind of mindset shift we had to adopt after the hackathon, because during the hackathon, you're trying to package a presentation that can be shown to judges, and you're scored on a specific kind of rubric. And I think the way the Teens in the AI hackathon was organized was the rubric was very much oriented to thinking about the kinds of questions that we wanted to think about in terms of what are the ethical considerations of deploying something like this? Is it actually going to solve the problem, right? And so during the hackathon, we kind of first started out by reaching out to lots of people and then seeing what they think. And that was a very valuable part of our sort of initial exploration. And all that happened during the hackathon. Afterwards, the first kind of mindset shift we had to adopt was to try and make decisions and do things as quickly as possible. Because especially during COVID, we were during the thick of the pandemic and people really needed help and time was sort of running out. And so we had to make decisions and pursue these partnerships to start serving people as fast as we could. And so that motivated our decision to work with Amazon, which Victoria talked about. And so because Amazon already has this existing like platform where you can make where shelters can make lists of things, items that they need, like the exact items, and then donors can order those off of the lists. Because Amazon already had like an initial kind of platform of this going, we just decided we would partner with them because that was the fastest way to bring impact to our network of shelters and food banks. That also was coupled with this sort of diligent outreach. So we had to reach out to at least 50 different shelters and food banks in order to develop this initial network of 10 partner orgs, which includes some from New York, some from Atlanta, Georgia, some from Missouri, and many others across the US. We started this work during the hackathon, as I described before, but a lot of it also happened afterwards. We were just kind of calling and emailing people. And I think in a lot of these social impact spaces, you'll find that people are really receptive to kind of working with you. Even if you're like a team of 5 people, you're kind of teenagers and are not 100% sure of what you're doing at that moment, people are very willing to work with you and willing to see kind of where a partnership might lead. And then we took this other step that doesn't seem like as interesting, but was definitely very important, which was legal incorporation. So what we did was we filed for status to be kind of an official legal entity in the summer of 2020. And the reason why this is significant is because if you're an official kind of legal entity in the US, donations to your organization are tax exempted. So that just means that people are more likely to donate to your nonprofit because they don't have to pay taxes on their donations. So that was another kind of avenue through which we were able to get more funding and more donations through that because people didn't have to, there were less barriers for people to donate. And then we kind of wanted to make sure, as I said before, with the speed that we were getting things out and on the ground as fast as possible. And so in the first 2 years, we facilitated over $10,000 worth in donations, and we helped 20 shelters and campaigns. And we were really excited by this, but we also wanted to see if we could make Bridge4Good into something bigger. We were really excited by the initial progress that we made in kind of partnering with these organizations and helping out homeless folks. And we wanted to bring that sort of empowerment to individuals across the country. And so we opened up some new features that allowed student-run campaigns to raise donations for charities and volunteer organizations in their communities that they cared about. Because we had some people actually asking us like, hey, can I do this? And the amazing thing about starting your own organization is that it is truly up to you, right? And so you have the agency to shape the mission of where your and the direction of where your organization is going to go. And if someone comes up to you and has a great idea, you can help them make it happen. So that was kind of the motivation for our student-run campaigns. And then in order to also help us with a lot of the work that we were doing, we added a group of volunteers as well as a volunteer coordinator to our team. So our team became like 15 from 5. And that was really, really helpful because we definitely, as some people alluded to before when we were doing the word cloud, it is quite a lot of work, and it's definitely the amount of work that you can do scales with the number of people that you have, right? And so having more people helped us kind of accomplish more of our goals. And then we also wanted to kind of give back to the community where this all started, which was sort of teens and AI and this interest space of people who, young people who are interested in technology, in AI and machine learning. And so we facilitated a series of free intro workshops to expand youth access to technological literacy, to introduce them to AI and machine learning. And so this was also kind of part of the ideas that like we wanted to do. And so Bridge4Good became kind of beyond just our initial idea that we proposed at the hackathon. We also were able to kind of expand and grow it in a variety of ways.
All right, thank you, Karina. So I'm going to talk about what this looks like now, 4 years down the line. So we've started a bunch of chapters across the US ran by individual youth-led initiatives. When you give these students that opportunity, it's amazing to see the millions of different things that they do with it. In partnership with Emory KidsUp, we've held medical screening events that have provided essential healthcare access to those in Atlanta, and our platform continues to enable teens to create this meaningful change in their local communities. So I'm going to show you some of the events we're working on right now. All right, so we spoke at an environmental conference, I think last February, which was incredibly cool because our initial mission was just AI and social good and healthcare, and it spread into varied interests by these individual social youth groups. And then we've held meetings and hackathons and workshops, introducing kids to AI, introducing kids to social good, and showing them that the impact that they can have individually. So our biggest event would be this Emory screening that we got news coverage for, and we were able to talk to Bridge4Good and partner with Emory doctors and students to hold a large medical screening that helped 200 in February gain access to healthcare, medical supplies, winter supplies, clothing, and warm showers.
Now we're going to transition into some of the AI-related projects that we've done outside of Bridge4Good, and we're happy to answer questions after this section, which is our last section, either on Bridge4Good, any of these application areas, or just like happy to talk very openly about our experiences. So in particular, some of the AI-related projects we've done within kind of like the broad umbrella of social impact has included also like climate change and environmental issues, kind of like in healthcare, in particular in disability accommodations, as well as in like sort of biology research. So I'm going to start with a project that I did within the biology research space. So it gets like a little bit technical. I'm happy to delve into more details. But essentially, I don't know whether you guys have heard of this technology called CRISPR. Essentially, it's like a gene editing technology. So basically, everything in the human body, in animals, and anything that's living, essentially, mostly is like based on DNA, which then becomes protein, and then that carries out all of the functions that we have like every day in our body that lets us have our like to be alive, essentially. And then basically in the 2020, I think, Nobel Prize in Chemistry went to people who discovered CRISPR, which is something that acts like a pair of molecular scissors and is able to cut the DNA. It's able to edit the DNA, essentially. And then since these genes are kind of like the basis of biological function, it also plays a really important role in both studying and some treatments for diseases, including like certain types of cancers, certain types of genetic diseases. So essentially in this project, I made a machine learning model that goes from these target DNA sequences. Basically, we can cut them using CRISPR, but where should we target with this new technology? If we have a gene we're interested in targeting, for instance, for some cancer therapeutic, where should we cut along that gene? This is kind of like sort of unclear question, and we thought that AI or like machine learning tools might be able to help. So I took this DNA and then I predicted essentially the editing outcomes from this sort of like new tool that scientists were able to add to kind of their toolkit for combating such kind of like diseases or disorders. And I use like these two techniques that are listed here that I'm happy to talk about. But essentially, this is kind of the workflow of this one project that I did. And then after I made this machine learning model, I was like, maybe it's a good idea to try to make the kind of results and predictions of this model more accessible and available for everyone to see. So then one thing that you might want to think about, which is also, I think, like the theme of our talk, I guess, today, is thinking about having an idea and then bringing it to reality, bringing it to sort of real world impact. So after I had built this tool, I was like, how can I make sure that people can access this? Like kind of like running a machine learning model and doing all this like setup can be a little bit like there's more of a barrier or like activation to be able to do something like that. So then I thought like, why don't I make a database where I say like, here are all of the potential places that you could cut along this particular gene or like sequence of DNA that you're interested in cutting. So then let's predict for every location along. What does my tool say? What do we recommend? So also thinking about the deployment aspect of it and making sure that people actually have access to kind of the work that I've done or we've done and developed.
Thanks, Victoria. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that I did related to the impacts of climate change, and a similar theme to Victoria's project in that the research and the AI technology and the machine learning models can really make a difference in kind of making progress towards answering research questions. But I think it's only really worthwhile if you do end up putting that research in practice. So I'll talk a little bit more about that component later. And so these machine learning systems are really useful for climate change applications because oftentimes when we try to study climate change, it becomes very difficult because the Earth is very complicated, right? The Earth is like a big system. There's a lot going on. And the great thing about these AI and machine learning systems is that they can take in tons of different data from tons of different sources. And so in the climate space in particular, we use a lot of satellite imaging. So these are like, these cool satellites that fly around the Earth every 3 or 4 days or every week or so. They'll come over the same place again, so you get images that kind of cross space and time. And then within these satellite images you can also look at patterns about the weather. You can get a sense of like how the crops are doing in a specific place, and so you can get data on food supply and also weather from weather patterns from those images. And then we also kind of incorporate data from sensors on the ground, and so like a weather sensors and temperature sensors and things like that also come into play here. And so we take all that complex data, we put it in a machine learning model, and then we can forecast a lot of very interesting things. And what this project focused on specifically was forecasting acute undernutrition and food insecurity in Guatemala. And so the reason why climate change is related to these undernutrition numbers is that often in Guatemala, how much food exists depends on the climate, and it depends on whether the crops are able to grow. And so in a given year, you can use these climate factors to help predict undernutrition. And we did this in partnership with the Guatemalan government. So as I said before, we didn't feel like just doing the research was enough, right? And so we collaborated directly with the Guatemalan Secretariat of Food Security and Nutrition. They are in charge of making sure that everyone in Guatemala has enough to eat. And so we partnered directly with them to make our forecasts available to them so they can kind of use it in practice to inform their decisions. So this is a dashboard that I coded that has a more updated version of the forecast you can see on the right. Guatemala is separated into 20 or so different regions or states. And so you can see there's a different forecast of the amount of undernutrition that we project for each state using our model. And then we also had to kind of make sure that we were working directly with the secretariat government officials to address their needs. And so we had meetings with them to kind of talk through what our model exactly was doing, and then also talk through kind of how to interpret the forecasts for their decision making.
Thank you, Karina. I'm going to talk about this project I did for disability accommodations. So first of all, here was my idea. We have glasses, right? But for blind people, glasses aren't very useful because there's no way for them to see what's going on around them. So we were going to use semantic segmentation to auditorily say what was around them. And this is a thing already. I'm showing you a model that exists, but look at the price tag on that. That's $2,499. That's $2,500, which is inaccessible for people living in the US. So you have to think about how that affects people in third world countries where this is probably like a full year of salary for them. And for those who can afford a $2,500 disability accommodation, this isn't a huge deal because they have private schools and they have other accessible resources to figure out what's going on around them. I was talking to this man at the Karna Vidya Foundation, and I found that reading bus signals, just not being able to tell where bus routes are going, has like completely crippled his life because there's no way for him to get anywhere. So can you go to the next slide, Karina? All right, so here was my way to create that device for around under $20. So first I took this Raspberry Pi and a little camera auditory sensor, which is very cheap and accessible for all of you. In fact, to show that you don't need some fancy technology or lab to be able to do projects that make a significant difference. And then we took that signal input to Kinesis video streams, which I'm showing on the right, where you have this media data being entered and then separated into a ton of images. And then we use computer vision to say, hey, there's this image. We're going to look at it and figure out what's in that image and then repeat it. And on the left is this blind professor testing out that device and giving me feedback. And so I've been able to work with the Karna Vidya Foundation and this professor to take that project and hopefully implement it. All right, so thank you so much for listening to all of us. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, thank you, Karina, Neha, and Victoria for your presentation. Thank you so much for your insights and experiences. Now we invite the audience to ask questions. Please add your questions to the Q&A chat where we will answer them. How did you have the idea of creating a nonprofit organization, and what sources would you suggest for our participants who are considering the same path as yours?
Yeah, I guess I can start with this one. We kind of made the decision during the Teens in AI hackathon when we were thinking about what problems we wanted to address. And this was like the inspiration for this came from our local communities. Like we saw this happening in shelters that were near to our homes. And so that was a real problem that we could go talk to people about and ask people what they needed. And once we found out that kind of the scale of this problem was much larger than sort of us just going to the two shelters nearby and helping out, we are sort of a team from across America, and that really helped us figure out that this problem was happening everywhere and not just kind of where we were able to see it in our neighborhoods. And so that kind of gave us the idea that we needed an actual organization to pursue kind of the solutions that we wanted to pursue, as opposed to kind of just taking individual action, if that makes sense. And to your second question about sources for people who are thinking of pursuing the same path, I think that's a great question. One of the things that I would say immediately is to talk to the people around you that are being affected by the problem, right? So as many people as you can find in your local community, or like you could call different what we did was just call and email different shelters nearby. Doing that and really just talking to people and seeing where exactly their like the problem is that is, I think, the first kind of litmus test or kind of experiment almost that you could conduct to see whether it's appropriate to start an initiative.
Thank you for your answer. And so you mentioned that the team was between 13 and 16-year-old girls, your old version of yourself. So what would be your suggestion for young girls like your team when you had your first start at Bridge4Good based on your personal experiences? What would you suggest them to follow?
I mean, I can take this. Victoria, Neha, if you have thoughts, also jump in. I think from my personal experience, one of the biggest barriers to kind of success for me as a woman was like doubting myself. I think I almost felt like it wasn't my place to address this problem just because like maybe like because it wasn't necessarily a problem that I had personally faced. Like I didn't know, I almost felt like I didn't know enough or that I wasn't powerful enough almost. But I think the key realization here is that you actually don't need to be that powerful, right? Like impact usually starts within kind of your own community, within the people just around you, and it grows naturally with the team members that you end up building and developing, and the connections that you end up kind of fostering over time. And I think, like, especially in the Bridge4Good case, like, we had to do a lot of kind of team bonding almost because we had never met before we ended up starting this thing. And that was a really, I think, valuable experience for us to all lean on each other, right? Because I think we were a team of 5 girls, so all female, and I think we really were able to use that to our advantage somewhat, that we were able to relate to one another's struggles, and we were also able to kind of bring this to other women and girls who were interested in doing similar things. So this, I think, is the most important point here, is that like you don't need to feel totally prepared or totally kind of powerful in order to do something like this.
I was 13 when we were starting this. I mean, that was like the end of middle school for me, and obviously I had no technical skills, no networking skills. I had no idea how to do it. So for the younger students here looking to get started, I would just say do it. Just dive in head first. I think when I first heard the term artificial intelligence, I had no idea what they were talking about. And so I went on Udemy and I just spent hours and hours and hours trying to figure that out. And all these small steps that I took, I mean, if you take a 13-year-old and put them in front of an artificial intelligence course that's full of linear algebra, obviously you understand nothing. But you keep taking those steps and you'll see really, really big results like we are right now.
Powerful response. I'll move forward with the next question. How can we maintain learning new skills related to AI along with our own study burden in any other field being a student?
Projects are the biggest way to do that. Like take on things like this. You can even take on things within school, because I found that my school assignments also can be loosely applied to AI, and if there is that chance to practice my technical abilities, I love to do that. So I just do projects wherever you can. You see this idea, it might be like outrageous and completely impossible, but there are so many tools you have now. Like we were talking about earlier, we didn't have ChatGPT when we were starting this. We didn't have any of the AI tools you have now. You have all of these tools in front of you, so just dive into it. Create projects, and it doesn't have to be like a huge thing outside of your school curriculum. As long as you're thinking about it and actively trying to learn, you will definitely learn.
Thank you, Neha, for your answer. What do you think that is the future of Bridge4Good?
Are huge right now. We have so many individual chapters, and honestly, I have no idea exactly where Bridge4Good will be sitting 5 years from now. But now we have youth taking these own initiatives to create changes in our community. And so I envision Bridge4Good becoming an even bigger social movement than before, with our chapters and affiliates and sponsors continuing this effort along with us.
Thank you for your answer. What was your first attempt to gain funding for your organization and how successful was it?
I guess I can jump in on this one. Um, the first kind of big initiative we did, honestly, it was friends and family, right? So we reached out to the people closest to us. We said, hey, we're working on this thing. It's very important to us. We'd love for you to kind of contribute. And those donations were not to Bridge4Good as an organization as much as they were just donations that went directly to our partner shelters. And so I think the way that Bridge4Good was organized as kind of this like intermediary almost between shelters and donors, I think it helped us not have to look for as much funding for the organization itself, just because what we really wanted was the funding to get to our partner shelters. And so there's kind of two like components to this. One is funding to kind of keep up the Bridge4Good organization itself. And so that we did gain through some grants that were very generously given to us by a few different sources. And that was really, really helpful to kind of get us started in terms of our own expenses. But Bridge4Good was kind of not that expensive in operation. And so it was most of the kind of funding that we really wanted to facilitate was to these partners. And I would say like the donations we facilitated through, friends and family, that kind of uptake is fairly successful. But then once we started trying to move beyond friends and family, that's where it got pretty challenging, right? And so we thought a lot about like doing, like how would we approach this? And so we kind of did some more social media, we were more active on social media. We did some campaigning there. We also kind of had our friends and family kind of disperse the idea out to their sort of friends until it sort of became something that a lot of people, even people we didn't know necessarily, like ended up knowing about it. And I think that's in a lot of ways how a lot of these initiatives start, right? It's sort of you kind of grow outward from the people who you know.
We allow for people to do these sorts of personal campaigns, and we found that allowing kind of like youth to feel empowered to start their own sort of initiatives, and also very kind of like local community based. Like Neha described last year, how she did an initiative in Georgia that got kind of like even local media and news involved. So just thinking about having localization to find networks in local communities as ways to kind of like get also like local kind of people really aware of the initiatives you're doing as a really powerful and maybe more distributed way to get the word out, to raise funding, stuff like this. Yeah, thanks everyone for your time and for listening.
Thank you so much for you all to join us for today, but we have to end our Q&A session right now. We're so grateful for the presentation. But not least, I would like to thank Sage Foundation and Red Hat for their support as our sponsors for this event.